Greetings, scholars, and welcome to Following the Gong, a podcast of the Schreyer Honors College at Penn State. Following the Gong takes you inside conversations with our scholar alumni to hear their stories so you can gain career and life advice and expand your professional network. You can hear the true breadth of how scholar alumni have gone on to shape the world after they rang the gong and graduated with honors, and learn from their experiences so you can use their insights in your own journey. This show is proudly sponsored by the Scholar Alumni Society, a constituent group of the Penn State Alumni Association. I'm your host, Sean Goheen, class of 2011 and college staff member. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. If you're a regular listener, welcome back. Christopher Wilson, class of 2006, is a senior associate in the Washington, D.C. office of the international law firm Baker Botts. His practice there focuses on civil antitrust and other complex commercial litigation. He earned his BA in political science with honors from Penn State's College of the Liberal Arts and went on to earn his JD from Stanford in 2012. He played running back and fullback for the Nittany Lions in his first and second years as a scholar. This episode will be helpful to any scholar who is facing obstacles, and particularly student athletes, as Chris talks about his experience of nearly dropping out before leveraging relationships to stay and succeed. You can read Chris's full bio and a more detailed breakdown of episode topics in the show notes on your podcast app. With that, let's get into our conversation with Chris, following the gong. Chris, thank you so much for joining me here on Following the Gong. I'm really excited to talk to you, dive into your story. I think it's a really fascinating one. Really excited for our scholars to hear it. And I think a great place to start that is, how did you first come to attend Penn State and the Honors College? I know there were other options that were recruiting you that were also great institutions, but why us? What drew you ultimately to Penn State and the Honors College?
Well, thanks, Sean. Thank you for having me on. I'm happy to be here. So as far as Penn State, I was a pretty highly recruited football player coming out of high school. Penn State was one of the schools that was very actively recruiting me, but I was also being recruited by, a few dozen other schools, and chief among them was, at least from my perspective, chief among them were the schools that could be were generally considered the top schools, at least that had Division I football, but also were excellent academic programs. So Stanford and Duke were among them. UVA and Michigan were among them. The Ivy Leagues were among them too, but I was concerned about you can't give athletes full scholarships there. So my family couldn't afford school, and we're leery about loans. So Ivy Leagues were axed out of convenience, but Stanford was still there. Duke was still there. The public Ivies were still there. And as I was going back and forth, I'd go up to Penn State. I went up to Penn State more than any other school, and just fell in love with the campus, fell in love with the atmosphere of the overall university. Of course, fell in love with the program. It's a great athletic program at Penn State, of course, one of the best historically. So that was a big driver, but I was, candidly, Stanford was in the lead. Duke fell out because Duke didn't have quite the football program, but Stanford was in the lead until the recruiting coaches asked me to come up and then invited me to the Honors College. They sent me the metrics saying, students from the Mid-Atlantic area, from Pennsylvania, who could otherwise go to these top schools in the country, often will come to Schreyer. They'll come to Penn State because of Schreyer. So that competition is there, that level of academic excellence is there, and we think you should try it out, or at least give it a shot. So I came up and I spoke with who was then the dean, Cheryl Ochterberg of the Honors College, and had a really fantastic conversation with her, and a fantastic conversation with a few other Honors College staff. I think at that point I spoke with a couple of professors as well. And I came away just really satisfied that I wasn't giving up anything by going to Penn State rather than, picking the quote, the Stanfords of the world. And that really, the Honors College is really what put the school over the top. Just that comfort that I was going to get the excellent education that I could pair with at least the aspirations of a football career.
So you wanted to play football, but I have to take a step back, where did you play your high school football?
I played in Catonsville, Maryland. So it was a small public school just outside of the city of Baltimore. Not a very big school for sports in general and football, but I stood out in part because I was the biggest and fastest person on the field. When you're in high school and with playing against small public schools, you don't really have people who fit that mold. And there was some word of mouth that came out because I was, I guess, the smart kid who was the respectful football player who was also better than everyone else on the field. So the word of mouth got out, and little by little, people started coming to visit. But it was shout out to Catonsville, Maryland, for sending me to Penn State at least.
So you mentioned that you had football aspirations, but obviously that is a time-limited career for those who even do make it to the NFL. And if you want to hear more about that, you can go back and listen to our episode with Stefan and Hillary Wisniewski. Great conversation there. Shameless plug. But Chris, obviously you had to have some kind of what would I do after football in mind. So what drew you to pick your major when you got to campus?
Yeah. So that was, the balance of academics and athletics was really the sort of main driver for my picking schools in the first place. So it was understood that, football might or might not work out, but I wanted to be able to, have some good academic foundation for whatever happens next. But as far as picking my major, it was more, where my strengths were and where my preferences were. As far as credits were concerned, I double majored in poli-sci and English, but I could only pick I didn't want to write two theses, so I had to pick I had to pick poli-sci as my actual major for honors purposes. But I went that route because I really like the practice that's available in both of those majors of really exploring intellectual, and substantive ideas. So in English, you could sit there and, learn about the history of famous scholars, write to the best of your ability, learn to hone those skills, those persuasive writing skills. Poli-sci was just a real interest to me. I was the inner workings of the United States government and how it interacts with the states has always piqued my interest. And I could also build those analytical skills through that major as well. And at Penn State, poli-sci for honors purposes is a quantitative major. So my thesis had to be grounded in statistics. So I was able to get that skill set as well.
So speaking of that thesis, can you tell us what that experience was like and what advice you have for students as they work on completing it, whether it's in a quantitative field like political science or really anything?
My thesis experience was an interesting one because, there's that. It's essentially a 3-year process to choose your thesis. You got to go through, get the required courses in your major, and then select your thesis advisor. You're going to get an honors advisor, but identify your thesis advisor and start that process as early as possible of sort of working on the ideas. If it's quantitative, identifying the data set, developing your skill set so that you could actually work within the data. So as a part of that, what really helped me was the fact that I developed a relationship with both my honors advisor and my thesis advisor. So these are Michael Berkman, who was my honors advisor, and Major Coleman, who was in the African American Studies department at the time. I think now he moved up to SUNY, State University of New York. Over the years, I actually met both of them. I think before as a part of the recruiting experience for football, the coaches at Penn State were very thorough in terms of making sure that I was comfortable with the academic environment at Penn State. And as a part of that, they introduced me to a number of professors. In any event, I took the time to go to those professors' offices to sit with them. There was a point, end of my sophomore year going into my junior year, where football started not to work out at all for me. And just because of a series of injuries and my grade starting to fall. And that got to the point where it was, sort of threatening my ability to maintain the GPA for the Honors College. That was when I started going to these professors. I started going into the Honors College too, but I went to those two professors and they were able to support me as I was going through that process. So that's going back to your question about what the thesis experience was like. It starts with your relationships with your honors advisor and your thesis advisor, I think, because especially as I started getting into the data, like the process of actually writing my thesis. I would spend weekends with Professor Coleman in his office just crunching numbers. Then we'd go out and grab tea. And when I submitted my thesis, Professor Berkman took us out for beers, all of his honors advisees. I still talk to, I was emailing Professor Berkman earlier this year, actually, or late last year, I think. Those relationships both help calm you as you're going through the thesis process, and they provide guidance and mentorship to make sure that you're going down a correct path. Like, for instance, with my thesis, I initially started with a data set that I thought was going to hit the issues that I needed. So my thesis was about essentially generational change in political affiliation among African American communities and its effects on voting habits across generations. I initially started with a data set, and Dr. Coleman, for about 6 months, pushed back on me, said, I don't think this is the right one. I don't think this is the right one. And I kept saying, I think I can do it. I think I can do it. And eventually, he prevailed upon me just because, he and I had long conversations about what I was trying to do with the data, what sort of analyses I was trying to implement. And that guidance, actually it clarified and helped structure my ultimate thesis. So I can't overstate the value of the relationships that you can build with your honors advisor and your thesis advisor. These are in a campus with 50,000 students in it. These are your opportunities to really develop these close personal relationships with professors who are leaders in their field and who actually care about you. They have a vested interest in ensuring that you complete your thesis. For me, especially going into my senior year, it was an open question whether or not I was going to be able to do it. But Major Coleman and Michael Berkman really helped guide that process for me. If there's one takeaway I can offer, it's build those relationships and value them.
I think that is a really solid point. I also like that you mentioned about starting early. You don't really want to do too much in your first year, but by the time you hit your second year, it's good to start thinking about those topics. I know, kind of to your point with what you were saying about, hey, this isn't the right data set. This isn't the right data set. Harken me back to also in the same department. I pitched an idea for a thesis to a different faculty member, and she was like, this is a really cool idea, but the data doesn't exist. So you need to come up with something different because you're not going to be able to do what you want to do. And I think that's really great that they're that honest with you and saying, hey, this is how you can succeed. But it's incumbent on you as the scholar to really help start building those relationships. So I think that's really great advice, Chris.
Yeah, no, and it's not not necessarily all about, towards the thesis. Your honors advisor and your thesis advisor are there to help guide you to make sure that you graduate with honors, but they are genuinely they have a vested interest in your success, building their relationships just as humans. Not as what they can do for you in terms of graduating with your honors as a Schreier honor scholar, but just building their relationships overall can help grow you as a person, but also enhance your student life. So I'll give an example where I keep jumping back and forth here, but to summarize a key point in my career at Penn State. When I first got to Penn State, I got hurt. I ruptured one disc and herniated two others in my back, had to get back surgery. And then over the course of my first 2 years playing football, just had this procession of injuries. Over the course of that process, my grades started to fall and I needed to make a choice, essentially. Was I going to try to push through and maximize my athletic career? Was in the process potentially drop out of the honors college, make drastic academic choices? Or am I going to just, knuckle down and focus on making sure that I graduate as best as I could? And I chose the latter option. So I had to leave the football team and I went to speak to Dr. Berkman soon after I stopped playing football. And, he was proactively thinking about the things that I could do to sort of help prepare me for drafting my thesis, to help build my resume. And he identified a program at Duke. It's basically a pre-PhD program for diverse, poli-sci students. It's like an intensive 6-week course where you learn database analysis, statistical approaches. And I hadn't heard of it. He said, Chris, I think this would be a good idea for you. I will write your recommendation. I will, call the people I know down there and make sure that you at least have a shot to get in. And that didn't come out of, him necessarily just, wanting to make sure that I graduate with honors. He actually cared. But that was before my senior year. So it was a process that started my junior year. So that whole process of thinking about what you need to do, working with it, you don't have to be intensive about it when you're, in your sophomore or junior year, but be thinking about it, be thinking about what you need to do in order to structure your ability to write your thesis, and just be speaking with your advisors. It's a helpful process. It's going to be a deliberate process, but it's a helpful one in the long run.
So, Chris, I want to thank you for talking about your story there, and I want to dive a little bit deeper. So, a lot of our scholars are involved in a lot, sometimes many, too many things that they get involved in. We've had previous episodes where we've talked about folks who've done research, they've been on the Thon Executive Committee, they're involved in homecoming, they do internships, all these things. And we do value that as a college, but there is a point where you start getting diminishing returns on being involved. And you faced a hard choice. Can you walk us through what your mindset was and how scholars who maybe are trying to choose between different things, they get to a point where they're thinking, I can't do all of these things, and I need to pick what my priorities are. What are some things you considered, some criteria, and how you walked through that decision? And ultimately, obviously, you graduated with honors. You're here on Following the Gong. You wouldn't be otherwise. So you overcame that challenge. What advice would you give to students who are trying to balance that and realize that they maybe took on too much?
Yeah, no, it's a physical response that you get once you I can totally empathize with those scholars who think that it's the only way you can have it is if you have everything all at once. You come out of high school being told that you're the top of the class, the sky's the limit as far as your future is concerned, and you want to make sure that you have as many options available to you. So you try to do as much as you can, as often as you can. And while that's it's a laudable goal, as you said, Sean, it does have diminishing returns over time. And for me, the crux of the matter was when injuries started compounding in football. So that sort of limited my ability to really contribute. As much as I was, committed to trying to be the best that I could be on the football team, I was literally hamstrung by injuries and by, the fact that, it's a very, very competitive team. These were excellent. A lot of my teammates went on to the pros. A lot of ones that didn't are excellent football players. In addition to fighting my own body, I was fighting, not for a roster spot, but for, playing time with my teammate. If I was fully healthy, it'd be a coin toss as to whether or not, I'd have some success on the field. And then you married that with the fact that my grades were just in a precipitous decline my sophomore year, just because I was so distracted from what was the real priority, which is making sure that I, got the best education I could, did as well as I could in classes. If I could give any advice to the current and future scholars, it would be that you have to prioritize. I'm a lawyer now, and in law we call it triaging. You can have 10 things to do, but there are 3 things that absolutely positively have to get done. And then everything else you can prioritize at a secondary and tertiary level. It's a matter of making those choices. For me, it was, I could not let my grades drop. I could not fall out of the honors college. There was no net for me. I didn't have, like I said, parents can't afford college. I was going to drop out. I actually did drop out. That's a funny story. I can follow up with that after I complete this answer. But ultimately, I made that choice that my academic standing was more important than these extra things that were very, very important to me in my life. But that ultimately, if I lost this academic standing, my life would be dramatically different. I knew it at the time, and I knew that it was going to have consequences in the future. So I made that choice, and that's what I would recommend to current and future scholars is, if you're getting dragged down, if you're getting mentally distracted, if you're getting physically exhausted by everything that you have to do, it's okay to say, okay, I have to focus on this. Therefore, I cannot do this. It's okay to do that. And it's okay you're going to have the rest of your life to stress yourself out. And given the sort of ambitions that we have, you are certainly going to put yourself in the position of stressing yourself out. But as it stands in college, you need to focus on what's truly, truly important. And those things that you can do, by all means do. But if it gets to the overburdening, that triage that triage exercise is going to be important.
So before we get to your story about, or maybe this is tied to it, so take this next question as you will here, Chris. A lot of our students, they may pursue opportunities on campus in different leadership roles, or there's an internship that they really want, and they may not get it. Obviously, football was probably a huge part of your identity, and then you had to give that up. So how did you adjust to life as a scholar post-football?
Yeah. Okay. So that does tie into the dropping out. So it was, I thought I dropped out basically. So right before junior year started, I went to talk to Coach Paterno. I told him that try as I might, injuries were too much, my grades were falling, and I greatly appreciate the opportunity. I sat down in his office and I can't thank you enough for the opportunity, but I have to make a choice. And this is the choice that I made, is to make sure that I can at least pursue focus on academics. Then I went to the honors college and I talked to the staff there and said, hey, I appreciate the opportunity, but I'm no longer playing football, so I presume this means that I will not be able to stay at Penn State anymore. Candidly, I was planning to go back to Baltimore, start working in a box factory, save up money, and then try to apply to University of Maryland. I actually went back home and I was laying in bed. And I get a call from the football team, from somebody on the football team who said, hey, where are you? And I said, I don't, I talked to Joe. I'm no longer on the team. And he said, basically what had happened was after I spoke with Coach Paterno and spoke with Dean Ochterberg and other staff at the Honors College, Dean Ochterberg and Coach Paterno actually had a meeting and reached an agreement that would allow me to stay in school. So how it worked was Coach Paterno would keep me on football scholarship for my junior year. And then Dean Ochterberg would find a scholarship for me for my senior year, so that I was going to be able to stay in school. That was a tremendous act on both of their parts, and I to this day I am endlessly grateful to both of them. But it feeds into how my transition worked away from football, because it was an adjustment. It was a very, very significant adjustment, because your day is scheduled. Your day is from the minute you wake up until 9-10 o'clock at night. Your day is scheduled when you're playing football, and it's probably the same when you're on most of the athletic teams at Penn State. Losing that structure it took some time to adjust to, because all of a sudden it's 6 a.m. and I don't have to be in the training room, or it's 5 p.m. and I don't have to go to video, or it's 7 p.m. and I'm not in study hall. The process was a long one, and it took some time, because Penn State is not if you want to be distracted at Penn State, it's very easy to be distracted at Penn State. So knowing that the reason that I had to leave the football team in the first place is because I was too distracted, sort of helped give me a little bit of discipline in terms of what was happening next. So it was a lot of exploring Penn State, what it had to offer, but also a lot of just closing out the distractions, closing out the noise. I have work to do. I have to do this work. You pick the times. You pick the times when you can engage, and when you have to, just buckle down and get the work done. But at the same time, I would caution the scholars against getting so deep into, the work that they have to do, the organized activities that they have to do, that they miss the opportunity to really enjoy what Penn State is. Penn State is a community. It's got a lot to offer just outside of the classroom. I don't think I would have appreciated Penn State as much as I do if I didn't have that opportunity to really engage with the campus, just, meet regular students, go to the bars. So it was a somewhat arduous, but ultimately enjoyable process of sort of adjusting. But again, you keep your priorities straight. No matter what happens, do the work. If you have to cut out the distraction, though, to get the work done, you get the work done.
I think that's impressive that, you only have so many scholarships on each of the different athletic teams. So that's impressive. That one was leveraged on somebody who wasn't able to play anymore. So, and if you're a scholar and you're probably thinking, wait, Dean Achterberg, isn't our Dean Mather? We get these emails every week, the student newsletter, and if you don't read it, you should. And he writes a nice little note to you all in the top of it. And you're like, wait, what? I'm confused. So Dean Achterberg was the first dean of the Honors College. So she helped get things up off the ground after the gift from the Schreier family. So a little history lesson for you as, two liberal arts grads sitting here talking. We've talked a lot about your time here on campus in Happy Valley, but eventually you left, you graduated. Tell us about your first roll out of college, because it is a little bit different than what you're doing now. So how did you decide on what was the next step?
Right. Yeah. So yeah, I got my thesis in on time. I graduated with honors. I got my medal, my honors medal. When I was graduating my senior year, I was speaking with my honors advisor and my thesis advisor about just continuing in this process. I've already started to dig into, quantitative analysis, statistical analyses for in this political science space. I should just go ahead and go through and get a PhD in political science. And that was my initial, that was the initial long-term plan. But then I decided, I don't necessarily want to stay on a campus for, the next 5 years. I want to take some time out, but I don't want to go fully off track of this PhD process. So I started looking for basically jobs in research firms. Those liberal arts honors majors, I'm sure they'll know Brookings Institution and Rand Corporation and all those things. There are companies around mostly in the DC area, but around the country really, that do these statistical analyses that, the survey research with, a political bend or a sociological bend. So I ended up finding one of those research firms. It's called Westat. Western Statistics is what it's called. It's based in just outside DC, where I could essentially continue in the vein of, doing research, doing hard quantitative analyses. This was a survey research firm, essentially. So it primarily worked, at least in the segment that I was working in, the division I was working in, it was evaluating federal programs. It would craft surveys, implement surveys, analyze the surveys, write reports, essentially, us evaluating and assessing various funding programs from the Department of Education, Department of Justice, a few other departments, federal agencies. That was hardcore work. I mean, it's going into schools, implementing surveys, going into prisons, juvenile justice facilities, speaking with students, implementing surveys. We write the surveys, then we implement them, then we do the back end statistical analyses of them, then we write the report. So it was. I thought it was very similar to and a lot of the people that I work with at Westat were PhDs in political science or PhDs in statistics. So it seemed like an appropriate sort of in line with academia. I could maintain the sort of the skill set, but take some time off campus, get to explore the world a little bit. That was, it was a very good experience. I got my first taste of academic writing is one thing. Writing for reports that are going to be submitted to Department of Justice or submitted to Congress, that's another thing. They don't like flowery language. They like straight to the point. Here's the deal. So the idea, the practice of sort of sifting out the flowery, here's 10 pages when it could have been 6 process, it started there. It was an enlightening experience and it was good. Ultimately, I decided that, the PhD route wasn't one for me. Just a choice. I think it's just a choice of future career paths. Academia it's a competitive space. It's a very, very competitive space, especially for PhDs trying to get professorships. At the time, I was 3 years in or 2.5 years in at Westat, making the choice between PhD programs or something else. And I, after thinking about it a little bit further, I decided on something else. And that process was from there, it was actually very straightforward. I'd spent 3 years doing deep research and writing. Law school. I'm going to go to law school. That's just research and writing. That's research and writing too. Okay. So that's how I ended up in law school.
And kind of going full circle, you ended up at Stanford.
I did end up at Stanford. I actually wrote in my essays, talking about my undergrad experience, talking about how I was being recruited for football. I specifically mentioned that I got a scholarship from Stanford in my essay. I don't know if anybody read it or cared about it, but it was a verifiable fact had they cared to go back into the football records.
So what was your law school experience like? Especially you had some opportunities out, like you just described. You were out in the working world for a few years. You had the research background. How did you translate that into your law experience? And a key part of law school as well, I'd love you to talk about, is what you do in the summer, those practical experiences, and how you leverage those opportunities to set yourself up for success.
Law school is a little bit of a different, it takes an adjustment from a space like Westat into law school, because again, I spent 3 years at Westat sort of learning how to adjust my writing to the mode of here's what you asked, here's what we did, here's the answer. In law school, at least, especially that first year of law school, basically the style of law school is essentially exploration, right? So those scholars who are thinking about law school are going to hear about the Socratic method, where professors purport to teach the class by essentially asking questions and getting the student asking questions to allow the students to reach the conclusion themselves. And that sort of process extends into exams for law school as well. So where there's a heavy amount of, but here's the question. It could be this for these reasons, or it could be this for these reasons. It's essentially the process of getting to maybe yes, maybe no, but here's what we recommend, sort of thing. And that was an adjustment, because I'd spent the previous 3 years saying there's a yes or a no answer. And in law school, it's not necessarily that. It's understanding why it could be yes or why it could be no. The academics were an adjustment, but the actual process of law school, the practical experiences are what I appreciated the most. They're the summer experiences where you can get an internship. And then at most law schools, they're also going to be what are called clinics, legal clinics, where you can actually get practical experience in a courtroom, dealing with contracts, dealing with clients that would be otherwise difficult to get in your regular legal coursework. So I took advantage of the clinics as much as possible. You could take up to, at the time when I was there, you could take up to 2 clinics, and then you could take an advanced version of one of the clinics that you've done previously. So I did all of that. After my first year of law school, I interned in a school district. The legal counsel's office for San Diego Unified School District, just because I was doing a lot of education work at Westad, and it seemed like an interesting area to explore as a lawyer, just seeing the legal side of public education. But a lot of the practical experience was in dealing with my classmates. There are a lot of students in law school who choose, and I imagine a lot of scholars would be of this mind as well. There are these gold stars I need to get. I need to get on the law journal. I need to publish something. I need to, become a research assistant for a professor so that I could get a clerkship for a judge when I graduate from law school. And that's all good. That's all good and well. And if you have the ability and interest to do that, I'd recommend doing it. But for those who are a little bit more on the fence about going that route, I would say it's not necessary that you sort of force yourself into that bubble if it's not something that you think is actually the correct fit for you. So I did a lot of, in addition to, worked in a law firm my second year, after my second year of law school, I worked in a law firm. While I was in law school, I did a lot of, I was in the law school student government. I was the president of the Black Law Students Association. I was the treasurer of the Black Graduate Students Association. I was trying to find ways to really get to know the campus and my classmates and the broader university, and just developing. Again, I said this about your advisors at Penn State, and I'll say it's a continuing skill that's valuable to you. Developing relationships, developing personal relationships with people, not just because they can benefit you in the future, but because it'll help you grow as a person. Being stuck in a classroom or a library or a conference room, it can help certain people, but for a lot of people, myself included, relationships help just as much. I'm 10 years out of law school now, and there are people who I met in the medical school and the business school at Stanford who are not only close friends, but they're moving into positions that might actually be valuable to me as a lawyer. It's important, I would say, to sort of value those relationships and build their relationships even while you're in law school.
I've had a couple other attorneys on this podcast before, and a common theme with law school is that there's a lot of things you can do with the JD. Lots of different paths you can go. You can be a general counsel in, say, a for-profit business or a non-for-profit. You interned in the legal team for a school district. You can be a business owner. You could be a sports agent, lots of different things. What specifically led you to corporate law of all things? And for scholars who may be interested in that path as well, what would help them to know ahead of time to help them be successful?
Giving a bit of just practical advice for law school. Make sure you have, I would recommend that you have a reason or you have a plan for when you go to law school. It's not necessarily, I want to do this or I want to be this person. It's just make sure it's not your, just some, oh, I don't know what else to do with my life, I'm going to go to law school. With me, I had, like I said, I had a solid foundation and the sort of skills that were going to be useful in the law that I understood were practical benefits to being a lawyer. The research and writing. A lot of my classmates at Stanford came from varied backgrounds, and they're doing exactly what you said they were doing, Sean. Some are they own startups. Some of them are working in far-flung locations around the world. Some of them are investment bankers. It's not necessarily a given that you go to law school to become a corporate lawyer, but for a lot of these, especially the sort of higher ranked law schools, it's sort of like it's a given path to go to. Like, these firms are eager to have highly intelligent, highly skilled, eager lawyers coming from these sorts of the upper echelon of law schools. For me, corporate law it seemed like a good career path to sort of continue again where my skill set was. And now I do antitrust litigation, which is really a continuation of research and writing, and it has an economics bend. And statistics and economics are two entirely separate academic fields, but it still does lend some familiarity to the analyses that are required in the type of law that I do. So it seemed like for me, it seemed like corporate law was an appropriate fit for what I'd been doing and what my skill set was. If I was, talking to a current or future scholar who's thinking about law school, I would say some people go to law school because they don't know what else to do. Some people go to law school because it helps to clarify their goals in life. Make sure you know that you have a reason to go, and don't be beholden to any particular path. Like, don't say, oh, I'm going to be a public interest lawyer. A lot of people say that going into law school, and they end up being corporate lawyers. Don't have be open to the possibilities of what law school presents to you, especially if you go to a school like Stanford, or you go to a school that otherwise allows you to engage with business students and engineers and the other aspects of graduate life on the campus that you're at. Don't be afraid of opportunity, because there's a lot of it out there. There are a lot of smart people who are doing very interesting things, and if you happen to build that relationship that leads you into something new and exciting, then you'll be all the better for it.
So, Chris, you are a donor to the college. So, first of all, thank you for supporting our scholars. I wanted to ask, what inspired you to do that? There's nothing that made you do that. That's not any kind of requirement. Certainly not for being on this show. I've had plenty of folks who are not donors. I've had some who are, some who aren't. But what inspired you to give back and support current and future scholars the way that you're doing?
Yeah, so going back to that sort of pivotal, after I left stopped playing football, and when I thought that I was not going to have any funding, I was going to go work at a box factory, and then got the surprise that I was actually still at Penn State. I went to thank then Dean Cheryl Ochterberg, and we had a nice conversation where she pointed out that she said to me, so Coach Paterno stepped in and said, he would cover the scholarship for this upcoming year. But then she said, even if he hadn't, we would have found a way. And, she mentioned that there are scholarships that are available for just those students who there's a last minute, very important need, like these highly, highly extenuating circumstances where it's just this student has no other option and needs this money. Her discussing that, just saying that, basically the Honors College prepares for these sorts of situations where, when all else fails, we want to keep the student here. Let's do what we need to do in order to keep him here. That resonated with me. That still sticks with me. As I started to settle in my career as a lawyer and, over time started to save up a little money and get a little settled, make sure, like, reasonably confident now that I'm not going to be summarily fired 10 years in. That sort of thought of, those kids who really have limited options, and, worst case, like the bottom could fall out. They're operating without a net to begin with. What can I do in order to, try to fill that gap the way that Dean Ochterberg says that other donors to the Honors College try to fill that gap? So this is actually the first step. Like this donation that I set up, I'm hoping this is the first piece of a going relationship with the Honors College, because I was that kid that didn't have any other option, and the Honors College stepped up. So I would like to be that for somebody in the future.
And we really appreciate that, Chris. And this podcast originates out of the Development and Alumni Relations Office. So we're a little kind of our job to do these kinds of things. And
Yeah.
obviously, and if you want to hear more about still, jobs and philanthropy, go back and listen to, I think it's episode 13 with Tina Hennessy. It's a great conversation about philanthropy. Really appreciate that, Chris. If you're an alum listening, this is certainly something that you can do as well. So come talk to us. And if you're a scholar if you're finding yourself, or you have a friend who's also a scholar who's in a position similar to the story that Chris shared, or maybe, something else extenuating happens with your family or other things where that net falls out from underneath of you, or you don't have one to begin with, come talk to us. We care about you. We want to see you succeed. If you're a Schreier scholar, we want to get you across that finish line. So come talk to us if you find yourself in that situation like Chris did not too many moons ago.
Enough moons. Yeah. And I'll echo that, Sean. It's incredible. Both the resources and the dedication of the Honors College. Like you're not a number when you get into the Honors College. You're a real human person, and the staff and the university as a whole, and the Schreier Honors College, they appreciate that. You're not alone, whether it's a financial thing or, you're struggling in one way or another. The Honors College has resources. They will do what they can to try to get you through a tough time.
Absolutely. We can't guarantee anything, but we will do whatever we can to help you. So, come talk to us if you find yourself in that position. So, Chris, I think you teed up I want to move to the last third of our conversation here. How do you feel that your experiences as a scholar, as a Nittany Lion on the football team, as a poli-sci major, how do you feel that these helped you along your path, and would you have done anything differently? Besides maybe getting injured, I think that's probably one we might, but maybe not. Maybe that was what was meant to be. I'll let you answer that one.
I always caution against the what would you do differently, because of the butterfly effect scenario, right? If I picked this one thing to do differently, how might that affect everything in my life that followed it? All things considered, I like where I am right now. There are a lot of bad, but a lot of good as well. I think my experiences at Penn State really helped sort of firm up that mentality. No matter how, what's the best way to say this? A hardy mentality. This reality that sometimes life sucks. Bad things are going to happen, but there's always going to be a tomorrow, and you have to keep looking at that. You have to keep saying, okay, well, this was no good, but I've got other things that are going on in my life that are good, and I know that overall things are going to get better. Especially during that period when I thought I was done. I thought I was going to have to make a really, really dramatic restructuring of my life. I was looking at the positive. I have to drop off for a little bit, but I can make it. And I was undyingly appreciative. It's just never going to end. I'll go to my grave thanking Dean Octoberg and Coach Paterno. But having that hardy mentality and just saying, life is going to be tough sometimes, but you can do it. If anything, I learned that from my time at Penn State.
Chris, what would you say is your biggest success to date?
So, that's the... I don't know that I can answer that question. I think, again, if you look at everything if you try to look on the bright side of things, then saying what's your biggest success, my biggest success is, being where I am right now, being where I am today, given all the bad stuff that happened in life and all the hurdles that you had to overcome, just being able to say that, hey, I've got a good career. I'm surrounded by people who respect me. I am in a good position in life, all things considered. I'm just happy with that. You got to have a little humility. Success is a relative thing. I'm happy to be here.
That is a great approach. And speaking of positions, Chris, one thing I don't think we've actually ever mentioned, we've talked a lot about the football team, but we never actually mentioned what position you played. So where did you line up on the field?
Oh, yeah. I was recruited as a running back. So my redshirt freshman year was Larry Johnson's fifth year. His 2,000-yard year was my first year on campus. So then I switched to fullback. But yeah, I was a running back overall when on the team.
So kind of going back to the previous question that I asked, biggest success, and you had a great answer there. But what would you say is your biggest transformational learning moment?
Well, I think that would actually be in law school, because I got to Stanford, and I'm humbled by how brilliant I'm, like the people that I'm surrounded by. Same thing when I was in the honors college. You get humbled a little bit by recognizing the intellectual heaviness that surrounds you. But in law school, it took me some time to realize that I can run the same race in a different way that a lot of these people who are sort of, they want to go for the gold stars and be the ideal law student. I'm like, well, maybe I'm not built for being the ideal law student, but I can succeed in law school and I can build these relationships that I know are going to help me in a different way, even if I'm not going to be, president of the law review or the research assistant for the top professor, all these things. It's okay. It's okay to sort of reset your goals on the fly in that sort of respect. And that ability that recognition that it's okay to adapt. You're not going to if you don't get your first goal, reset the goal. Go for that new goal. It really hit home when I was in law school, and that's really sort of been a guiding approach since then.
Great advice. Speaking of advice, how do you view yourself as both a mentor and a mentee? What advice do you have for students as they approach those kinds of relationships?
Yeah, again, I mean, I keep banging this horn, or banging this drum, but it's an important one. Both for mentor as a mentor and as a mentee. The focus is on the relationship. The focus is on getting to know this person as a person rather than as a box to check off because you're a mentor and you signed up for this, or as somebody who knows this particularized knowledge, has this particularized knowledge, and is therefore valuable to you as your career. You want to know these people as human beings, and that actually helps deepen their relationship and invests both the mentor and the mentee in the relationship and in the future success of one another. So that's how I approach it. I want to get to know them as people and then I go from there.
Speaking of people, other than maybe Dr. Berkman and Major Coleman, who you talked about, and Dean Achterberg, are there any professors or friends from your scholar days that you wanted to give a shout out to?
Well, all of it, for better or worse, there's been a 100% plus turnover in the football program. But Kirk Deal, I keep getting emails from Kirk Deal. Hope he's doing well. I think he's a staffer now for Penn State Athletics Communications. Wally Richardson, I believe he's still there. He's now there. Yeah, Wally Richardson he's a hell of a guy, running the academic program for the football team. I hope they're doing well. There's some good people in that program. A reckoning rightfully occurred within the program, but I'm glad that there are still some good souls in there.
So just final 3 questions here for you, Chris. As we're wrapping up our time, what's a final piece of advice that you wanted to share but maybe didn't come up organically in our conversation?
I mean, one thing I would say for the scholars that are there is I can't overestimate how important it is to really take the time to try to enjoy yourself while you're in state college. I mean, you're going to look back 15 years after you graduate. If your experience did not include some of the fun things that, you see other Penn State alumni talking about and enjoying when they're 35 years old, enjoying a beer they come back for a game, or they meet up with alumni in their whatever town that they're living in, you're going to feel like something's missing. So I know there's a lot of, especially for scholars, there's a lot of people have that urge to really just buckle down. I don't care about the parties. I don't care about the football. I don't care about this or that. I just want to get my thesis. I want to do my job. I want to do my work. That's important, but you are in a special place. It's important that you at least try to engage with that in some respects. Try to have a little bit of fun. Don't stress yourself out too much, because there's a lot of ways to have fun at Penn State. That's important. Open that side up. Make some good memories.
Absolutely. College flies by. So I think that was really, really good advice. I recently hit my 10-year mark and I was like, wow, where did that time go? So I wholeheartedly echo that, Chris. If a scholar wanted to reach out to you and take this conversation further, what's the best way that they can get in touch with you?
So LinkedIn is very easy. You can also Google Christopher Wilson Baker Botts, Baker Botts. Just Google it, and I'll come up as the first link. But yeah, no, I'm happy to, if you're in DC, I'm happy to meet up for coffee. You want to talk on the phone or discuss by email, I'm happy to be there.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Chris. And finally, as is tradition here on the show, if you were a flavor of Berkey Creamery ice cream, what would you be? And as a scholar alumnus, most importantly, why would you be that flavor? Especially as a lawyer, Chris, explain your rationale.
Yeah. Well, no, I think I can be pithy with this one. There's this grilled Stickies ice cream, right?
There sure is. It's one of the newer flavors. Yep.
Yeah. No, I believe I had that at one point when I last came out to Penn State. I think that would fit me pretty well. Just because I'm I consider myself to be a cool take on an old classic. So that's how I kind of see myself, at least.
That is a great way to wrap up, Chris. And if if you get sick of being a lawyer, I think there's maybe some branding and marketing in your future too, with a phrase like that. And I think you're the first person as the time of recording to pick that flavor. So congrats on being the first one on that.
Hey, it was tasty when I tried it. So
it sounds delicious. I haven't had it yet, but I will definitely try to. Chris Wilson, thank you so much for joining me here on Following the Gong. I know you got to run. You've got lawyer things to do. Thank you so much for joining us here today. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Sean. I appreciate it. Take care.
Thank you, scholars, for listening and learning with us today. We hope you will take something with you that will contribute to how you shape the world. This show proudly supports the Schreier Honors College Emergency Fund, benefiting scholars experiencing unexpected financial hardship. You can make a difference at raise.psu.edu/Schreier. Please be sure to hit the relevant subscribe, like, or follow button on whichever platform you are engaging with us on today. You can follow the college on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn to stay up to date on news, events, and deadlines. If you have questions about the show or are a scholar alum who'd like to join us as a guest here on Following the Gong, please connect with me at scholaralumni@psu.edu. Until next time, please stay well, and we are